Rome conquered empires, overthrew kings, and turned entire peoples into subjects. But there was one place that even its crushing power failed to dominate. A land of mist, cold, and warriors who fought like shadows. Have you ever stopped to think about how the greatest army of antiquity was held back by tribes without kings, without cities, and without palaces? What was it about this land that made even Rome retreat? But to understand how Rome could be challenged by such different peoples, it's necessary to understand how Rome viewed its own mission and why this battle would become so symbolic. When Emperor Claudius ordered the invasion of Britannia in 43 AD, Rome believed it was facing yet another inevitable conquest. The legions landed with impeccable discipline, marching across unknown terrain as if they had always owned the island. And, in fact, in a short time, southern Britannia was under Roman control. The initial resistance from the local tribes, though fierce, was no match for the weight of Roman formations. But Rome didn't stop at victory on the battlefield. Once established, integration began. Wide, solid roads cut through the damp forests, linking forts and newly founded cities. Where there had once been only villages, amphitheaters rose to showcase power. Public baths brought a taste of Mediterranean urban life. And forums became places where local elites spoke Latin and wore the toga. Rome offered citizenship and prestige, turning enemies into allies. It was a strategy as effective as any sword, because it showed that resistance meant isolation, while cooperation meant power. This early success made the Romans believe that the rest of the island would fall in due time. If the south had fallen so quickly, why would the north resist for long? To Claudius and his generals, it was just another step in the empire's endless march, a formality before bringing the last holdout of the island under Roman order. But as they pushed northward, they discovered that this formality hid a challenge Rome had never faced. Caledonia, the region that is now Scotland, was nothing like the fertile lands of the south, nor the open plains where legions thrived. It was an untamable territory, mountainous, damp, covered in dense forests that seemed endless. The waterlogged soil of the peat bogs sank under the soldiers' steps, and the constant mist turned every march into a plunge into uncertainty. The climate was an invisible but relentless enemy. The constant cold stiffened muscles, wore down spirits, and spread diseases that no legionary discipline could contain. Supply lines stretched dangerously long, and what had been merely a matter of military strategy in other territories became a logistical nightmare. Rome knew how to conquer cities, subdue kings, break armies in open battle. But how do you dominate a people with no capital to besiege, no palaces to burn, not even a desire to negotiate? The Caledonians appeared and vanished like ghosts in the mist. They didn't offer the decisive battle Rome expected, but instead delivered swift, deadly ambushes, lightning attacks that demoralized soldiers and evaporated before Roman discipline could react. To Roman generals, it felt like fighting the land itself, and the land seemed to side with the natives. These warriors were known as the Picti, the painted people. Before each battle, they covered their bodies with bluish symbols made from the woad plant, creating an almost supernatural image. Imagine the psychological impact on disciplined soldiers used to facing regular formations. From the mist emerged half-naked figures, skin marked with glowing designs in the rain, shouting in strange tongues. To many legionaries, it felt like facing apparitions, not men of flesh and blood. Their resistance also relied on mobility. They mastered secret trails through the highlands, navigated rivers and lakes in light boats, and vanished into refuges inaccessible to anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. They could strike a Roman detachment in a valley and reappear miles away on the same day, leaving generals stunned by a war that defied Rome's rules. Even when they gathered in large numbers, as in the Battle of Mons Graupius in 83 AD, Rome didn't find the victory it sought. General Agricola recorded the clash as a triumph, claiming tens of thousands of Caledonians fell before his legions. But in reality, the outcome was far from decisive. There was no surrender, no lasting peace. The tribes simply scattered, returned to their forests, and resumed the attacks soon after. This was the essence of their resistance, never giving Rome the satisfaction of a final showdown. Every road built, every fortress razed, was challenged by relentless attacks that drained resources and broke troop morale. It was a war with no end, a war in which the enemy seemed untouchable. The war in Caledonia became a never-ending nightmare, a conflict that couldn't be ended with treaties, nor secured with walls. To the legionaries, it was fighting an invisible enemy. To Rome, it was the realization that its seemingly limitless power was beginning to meet its breaking point. Faced with the stalemate, Rome turned to a method that had worked many times before: terror. Where the sword wasn't enough, calculated destruction followed. The legions marched through villages, setting them ablaze, devastating crops, slaughtering livestock, and taking hostages. It was an ancient and cruel strategy. Deprive the enemy of sustenance, break their morale, and show that resisting the empire meant condemning themselves to hunger and death. But in Caledonia, this weapon proved useless. The Picts didn't rely on large harvests or cities full of storehouses. They were hunters, fishers, warriors who knew how to survive off rivers, forests, and mountains. When the Romans burned their homes, they simply abandoned them. When they destroyed the fields, they found it had only minimal impact on their way of life. Even hostages lost their strategic value, since no centralized leadership could be blackmailed into forcing all the tribes into surrender. The blow that had devastated entire peoples in other regions struck no target in Caledonia. The more the empire tried to subjugate through terror, the clearer it became that they were facing an enemy with nothing to lose. And precisely because of that, one that couldn't be defeated by the same weapons that had secured so many victories elsewhere. It was a shock to the Roman mindset, the realization that not all resistance could be crushed by brute force. It was then that Rome tried a change in strategy. In 122 AD, Emperor Hadrian made a bold decision: to erect a definitive line between the Roman world and the barbarian world. Thus was born Hadrian's Wall, 117 kilometers long, stretching from east to west across the island, dotted with forts, towers, and gates. It wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a symbol, a silent confession that beyond that limit began a territory Rome could not conquer. Decades later, Antoninus Pius attempted to go further. He ordered the construction of a second wall, farther north, believing he could finally push the frontier and subdue Caledonia. But the effort was a disaster. The Pictish attacks continued, the line was unsustainable, and soon after, the Romans retreated, returning to the safety of Hadrian's Wall. But even that retreat didn't mean the end of Rome's ambitions in the north. In the early 3rd century, a new emperor decided to attempt the impossible. In 208 AD, Septimius Severus launched what would be the greatest offensive ever mounted against Caledonia. He assembled around 50,000 soldiers, a colossal number, and marched toward the highlands with the intent of crushing the Picts once and for all. The strategy was ruthless. Scorched earth, villages were burned, forests devastated, livestock slaughtered. If the enemy hid, Rome would destroy everything that could sustain them. It was a campaign of fury, led by an emperor who would not accept the idea of defeat. But, as so many times before, nature and the Picts' own resistance proved to be unbeatable foes. The cold punished the legions daily, disease spread through the camps, and the harsh terrain consumed men and supplies at an alarming rate. Once again, the Caledonian warriors simply vanished when Rome advanced and returned to attack when least expected. What was supposed to be the final blow turned into yet another nightmare. And in the midst of this endless campaign, Severus himself fell ill. In 211 AD, he died in Eboracum, modern-day York, far from any military glory, surrounded by an exhausted and demoralized army. His sons, Caracalla and Geta, didn't hesitate. They ended the offensive and ordered a withdrawal. With the troops' retreat, Rome acknowledged what once seemed unthinkable. Its power had limits, and so Caledonia entered history as the land that even Rome couldn't conquer. A decentralized people, a relentless climate, and a hostile land showed the greatest empire of antiquity that not all strength, not all discipline, and not all the arrogance of civilization could overcome the freedom of those who refused to bow. Scotland became a symbol that not everything could be conquered, that Rome's dream of global dominion had well-defined limits. Hadrian's Wall still stands today as a scar of stone, A reminder that beyond it lived a people who never submitted and a land that Rome could never tame. Now, I want to know your opinion. Did Rome really lose in Caledonia? Or did it simply decide the conquest wasn't worth the effort? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story and want to see more epic content like this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. In the video on the screen, we'll reveal the Roman strategy that annihilated a giant army in just a few hours.